huge part of the context of the news cycle this week, which intensified the debate over whether President Biden should stay in the race, is the shock that a lot of people felt in the wake of the 6-3 ruling by the MAGA Supreme Court on Donald Trump's absolute immunity. The court basically went out of their way to tell Donald Trump, I mean, this is Roberts writing in the majority opinion, use the Department of Justice however you want, buddy. And the specter of what Trump will do in a second term only raises the stakes for this entire conversation about making sure he does not regain the presidency. Corey Brettschneider is a professor of political science at Brown University who wrote about the past presidents with dictatorial aspirations in his new book, The Presidents and the People, 5 Leaders Who Threatened Democracy and the Citizens Who Fought to Defend It. Leah Lippman's a professor at law at University of Michigan, co-host of the Strict Scrutiny podcast with Melissa Murray and my wife, Kate Shaw, and they both join me now. Corey, let me start with you because you're a scholar of American history and presidential power. Where do you situate this immunity decision and the explicitness of the kind of dictatorial aspirations often articulated by Donald Trump in American history in terms of there being precedent or totally off the map?
I certainly think it's a terrible decision and one that threatens democracy, but it's not the only one. We've been here before, and we've had instances where both presidents have threatened democracy in some fundamental sense, in which the court has certainly abetted and made it worse. So think of John Adams during the Alien and Sedition Acts. This is a law that Adams signs that's essentially aimed at shutting down the opposition party. It makes it a crime to criticize the president, but it doesn't criminalize criticizing the vice president, a member of a different party, Thomas Jefferson. Or during the Buchanan period, Buchanan lobbies the court in Dred Scott to essentially deny all rights to Black people. Plessy versus Ferguson is nationalized by Woodrow Wilson. And of course, in the Nixon period, Nixon claims that that he's above the criminal law because we're in a civil war and there's an emergency situation. But this is a horrific case. I wouldn't say it's at the level of Dred Scott, but it's similar in that it threatens the fundamental principle in a democracy that all people have to face criminal accountability, and that if a president especially commits acts that threaten democracy and are crimes, the very thing that Patrick Henry worried about at the founding, that we'd have a criminal president who threatened democracy, that they're immune, that is really a violation of the idea that no person is above the law.
Yeah, Corey talked about Nixon and the Department of Justice. And Leah, this to me is the place that I'm sort of most focused on, because there's sort of 3 strands here. There's one is Donald Trump's actual record in office, in which he explicitly viewed the Department of Justice as a kind of plaything, and he was frustrated by the fact they wouldn't just do what he wanted to do. And in fact, he would take to Twitter to say to Jeff Sessions, like, hey, go prosecute Hillary Clinton. We know behind the scenes he would try this as well. So we know Trump wants to do that. Project 2025 has this long thing basically saying, yes, that as a policy matter, we want the Department of Justice to be the president's plaything. And then Justice Roberts going out of his way in this decision in a way that, to my reading, he didn't have to basically say, hey, the president can do whatever he wants with his Department of Justice. What do you make of that part of the Roberts opinion and what it means for what could happen?
It's one of the more frightening parts of the opinion, and I think part of what makes it so appalling is that during the arguments, the justices were purporting to weigh, the risks on both sides, and you had the Republican-appointed justices basically speculating about whether, if a president could face criminal liability, they would refuse to leave office because they would be scared of criminal prosecution. But the reality is, we had a president who was interfering with the peaceful transition of power, and as you were saying, was threatening to use the Department of Justice against his allies. And now you have his upcoming campaign essentially laundering a platform in which he would have complete and total control over the Department of Justice. And the fact that in that context, Chief Justice Roberts wrote into the opinion, presidents have maximum plenary authority over the Department of Justice to issue them commands. And it doesn't matter what the president's motive is. It doesn't matter if the investigations are a sham. That he wrote all of that into the opinion, knowing full well the context of what is happening in the upcoming presidential election, I think is very frightening. It underscores that this court is absolutely not going to be a check on any of Donald Trump's worst impulses. At this point, they have immunized him from criminal liability and from political liability in the insurrection case from earlier this year.
I mean, what It also just is one of these things where, like, you run it through the intuition test, or you just do it. You say, okay, so that decision comes down. Joe Biden calls up Merrick Garland and says, I want a press conference about a criminal investigation of tax evasion by Clarence Thomas this afternoon. Like, we all understand that's wrong. It seems very obvious that there should be basic core constitutional protections against that, because it does seem like a violation of a bunch of, due process rights, et cetera. And yet it's basically been explicitly endorsed by Roberts. And what I get from your book, Corey, the parts that I've read, which are very good, is that this kind of civic and constitutional culture, forms of sort of institutional resistance, have at these key moments when you've had these kind of dictatorial aspirations beat it back, which I think is a really important historical lesson right now.
Yes, exactly. I mean, there's hope in my book. I don't want to underplay the threat of this moment. We are facing a true threat to democracy, as we have in the past, but we've been here before and we've recovered. And the way that we've recovered hasn't been the Supreme Court coming in to save us or lawsuits.
Right.
It's been citizens really trying to reclaim a democratic idea of the Constitution from an authoritarian president and from an authoritarian idea. So in that example of the Alien Sedition Act, it's really the newspaper editors who face prosecution, who turn their own trials into a trial of Adams for shutting down the right to dissent and reclaim it not in court, but by seeing to it that Thomas Jefferson is elected. And when he says we're all Federalists, we're all Republicans, he's really pledging to not shut down the dissent in the way that Adams did. And that's true of Frederick Douglass fighting back against Buchanan in the Dred Scott case, Trotter and Ida B. Wells fighting back against Wilson. And there was an attempt to fight back against Nixon, Daniel Ellsberg, but also the members of the grand jury who tried to indict him. And there were attempts at laws that would limit the Department of Justice being used as a tool of the president. But unfortunately, that law, the independent counsel law, expired. And we're really back to where we were during the Nixon period. We're really vulnerable to a president abusing power and taking control of the Department of Justice as a weapon, not as a source of enforcing justice.
Quickly, Leah, do you see ways to correct for this opinion in the short term?
The short term, ensuring that we don't elect a president who wants to interfere with the peaceful transition of power and prosecute their allies is kind of the minimum step in order to prevent this opinion from spiraling into the nightmares that Justice Sotomayor wrote powerfully about in her dissent.
All right, Leah Littman, Corey Brettschneider, whose new book, The Presidents and the People, is out now. Many thanks. Joining me now, Congressman Mike Quigley, Democrat of Illinois. Congressman, how you doing?
I've been better after watching all this.
Yeah, well, what do you think?
It was a horrible night.
The debate.
Yes. And everything's not okay. I know people's instinct is to be loyal, and I appreciate that. I know their instinct is to be a cheerleader, but that's not helpful. We need folks who are willing to understand where we are and what we have to do. And that is extraordinarily difficult. But you do it under the specter of a second Trump term. Right? Hey, and I was in the room on January 6th. The second Trump term is a continuation of the last days of his first term, which is a nightmare in every respect. So I don't think they're helping anyone.
Who's they?
Those who cheer on and think, oh, everything's going to be okay with where President Biden is. This is hard to do. I would rather be doing anything else. I'd rather be out in the Midwest talking to diaspora about what a second Trump term means to Ukraine.
You have been probably, I would say, the most strenuous advocate on behalf of the Ukrainian people in the U.S. Congress. Your district has a huge part of the Ukrainian diaspora. It's something you feel deeply about.
It's extraordinary because I know what happened. Last time I was in Ukraine, we met with President Zelensky, and we were in villages near 50 miles from the Russian border where they had been occupied. And they said to us after going through that hell, they said, if you leave, the Russians will be back. First day in office, Trump pulls his all support out, and this has all been done.
Okay, so those are the stakes, both for American democracy, for Ukrainian democracy. So what do you think should happen? I mean, there are Raul Grijalva, Seth Moulton, and Lloyd Doggett of Texas have explicitly said on the record they think the president should step aside and allow someone else to run. Do you agree with them?
I started the week doing an interview where I was talking about everything else, and then this came up, and I asked for help to get the words out. And I couldn't help because it's like talking to a loved one about such a tough situation. a man who pulled us out of COVID, who pulled us out of an autocracy, who did so many great things. How do you tell that person he can't do this anymore? So the way I started it was by thanking him, showing them that deference, and suggesting that his decision isn't just going to affect who sits in the White House for the next 4 years, but who controls the House and the Senate. These races are razor thin, those frontline seats. And of course, the Houses and the Senate are decided by single digits. And all these critical votes that everyone cares so much. So I would say to those folks who say everything's fine, it's not. And everything you care about is on the line. And you have to be realistic and you have to be tough. So the way I say this has probably changed since that day, just because I've had time to accept this and look at the polls. And if I talked to the president, I would say something different.
But you didn't answer the question. Do you agree with Raul Grijalva, Lloyd Doggett, and Seth Moulton? The president should step aside.
I had a hard time processing getting to that point with him, as I think anybody would who respects him so much. I would say, Mr. President, your legacy is set. We owe you the greatest debt of gratitude. The only thing that you can do now to cement that for all time and prevent utter catastrophe is to step down and let someone else do this. Because I think day one, we're back in a dogfight. All of a sudden, all the things we're talking about with President Biden, we've got a lot more we can talk about with Trump. Not just that he lied 28 times during the debate and that he's an absolute monster, but he has cognitive issues, something that Speaker Emeritus Pelosi brought up earlier this week. She's absolutely right.
So one of the arguments that other folks have made, and again, I think I've been pretty honest about this. You're talking about working your way through this. I feel somewhat similarly differently because I'm a journalist. I'm not an elected member, but I have a deep stake in the prospering of American democracy and its continuation. The idea of like the chaos that lies on the other side of that decision, that it would rip the Democratic Party apart. What do you think about that?
There's a process to do this. When we were trying to win in 2020, it was like, oh, we're going to be torn apart. I think people came together and made a very collectively pragmatic decision. In those primaries, they were going to be with Joe Biden because he had the best chance to beat Trump. They were right. They did it, and it worked. So that was chaotic. That was difficult. We didn't think we were going to get there. We're in a situation, ironically, it involves Joe Biden, the opposite scenario, where he can't be the person who's at the top of the ticket. So, look, I don't think there's anything wrong with having people intensely disagree with how we get to that point. But I think for the same reasons they came together 4 years ago, they will come together this time behind one candidate. And I think people underrate the bench. I think we have a lot of people who are great. I have the greatest respect for the vice president. So I think we can get beyond all that stuff. But clearly the alternative now is a very bleak scenario with, I would say, almost no help of succeeding. And it doesn't just affect the White House. It affects all of Congress and our future.
Let me just follow up on that because there's some, I think the Biden people, and I use that moment in the intro intentionally, they're sort of in 2020, it looked like he was done for after New Hampshire. There's been a few moments, we've talked about them, Trump after Access Hollywood, where I think if you went up to anyone who's a political practitioner, they'd be like, the guy's toast. He's done. He wasn't, right? So there's some sense in which there's some part of me sympathetic to the argument of like, don't get caught up in the moment. Things can change. This like, don't get too, because you never know what's going to happen. Does that weigh on you at all?
Sure. But look, a lot of pressure here. That's why it took time to get here.
Yeah.
But 4 years ago, you saw a different Joe Biden.
I think that's uncontroversial.
And there's a big difference between Democrats and Republicans, obviously.
Yeah.
Well, I came to the point as part of the Intel Committee investigation, Russian investigation, as part of the Ukrainian investigation, that there are a majority of Republicans in this country. We grew up thinking, I'll believe it when I see it. I think I'll see it when I believe it. I think Donald Trump was absolutely right when he said I could shoot somebody at Fifth Avenue and my people would still be with me. Democratic voters saw a catastrophe of debate, and a significant number had paused. Clearly, independents, and they're going to be critical here. Well, how many votes did Trump win by in 3 states?
55,000.
55,000. They could fill Soldier Field and have room to spare.
Congressman Mike Quigley, congressman here from Illinois. As I said, he has been incredibly dogged on the question of Ukraine. I'd love to talk to you more about that as this all develops.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.